From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. KJP, Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesbeing, was asked about Musk's tweets, not the Twitter files, because she won't answer questions about the Twitter files, particularly not about suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. But she was asked about Musk daring to tweet anything critical of Tony Fauci, the sainted Tony Fauci. And this is what she had to say. Count with me the number of times she uses the word dangerous.
These attacks, these personal attacks that we have been seeing are dangerous on Dr. Fauci and other public health professionals as well. They are disgusting and they are divorced from reality. And we will continue to call that out and be very clear about that. Again, these are incredibly dangerous, these personal attacks that we are seeing. Dr. Fauci has served under 7 Republican and Democratic presidents. We cannot forget that. He has given his almost entire career to civil service, as a public servant. His work on infectious disease from HIV/AIDS to COVID has saved countless lives. And, it's unfortunate that he has, we are fortunate, I should say, that he has devoted his career and his life and his exceptional talent to America's public health. And that's what should be discussed right now. That's what we should be thankful to him about. And again, these are incredibly dangerous and should be called out. I'll leave it there.
I counted 3 times. Dangerous, the word dangerous. And I appreciate that Karine Jean-Pierre is giving us guide rails as to what can and cannot be discussed when it comes to Tony Fauci. You are allowed to compliment him, not allowed to criticize him. Compliments are welcome. Criticism, dangerous. Probably threat to our democracy. Elon Musk was in San Francisco, called up on stage by Dave Chappelle. And you want to talk about dangerous? That was a dangerous move by Chappelle, although Musk seemed to enjoy the audience's reaction, even and especially perhaps the boo birds. Take a listen.
Elon. Hey, Dave. Controversy, buddy. Weren't expecting this, were you? It sounds like some of them people you fired are in the audience. Hey, wait a minute. Those of you booing. Tough road ahead, it sounds like. But you notice one thing. All those people are booing, and I'm just pointing out the obvious. They have terrible seats. I understand.
People booing have terrible seats. But, of course, that's not going to be received well, certainly not with good humor by the humorous left. You're only allowed, conversely to Fauci, you're only allowed to criticize Elon Musk. You're not allowed to compliment him because he is a threat to our democracy, as so Karine Jean-Pierre described. He's dangerous. For more on this, a little discussion about the Twitter files, too. Please be joined by Daniel Henninger, deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. Dan Henninger, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Dan.
What about Elon Musk's, the danger Elon Musk presents, sort of taking the mantle from Trump and trolling people like Tony Fauci?
Well, you're exactly right. The assumption here seems to be that one hardly knows how to say it, that public speech only is allowed to go in one direction, and that if people speaking in public go in the other direction, that is to say, criticize not only Anthony Fauci, but anything the progressives or the Biden White House is doing, then they are accused of engaged in dangerous or even violent speech. It's this is a very large issue, Dan. What we're seeing here across the board is an attempt on the left to basically drive certain ideas and certain discussion out of the public square, to suppress it altogether, something that's really quite unprecedented in the United States. And I hope Karine Jean-Pierre is aware of the exchange, for instance, in 2020 between Dr. Fauci and Francis Collins, the head of the National Institute of Health, in which they were talking about the Great Barrington Declaration, which was the document signed by a large number of scientists taking issue with the extreme lockdowns that Dr. Fauci was proposing. And the NIH, Dr. Collins, said this is extraordinarily dangerous, and couldn't we get a statement out really quickly out there to undermine their premises? And lo and behold, something did quickly appear in the mainstream press attacking the Great Barrington Declaration scientists, who were pushed out of the public discussion. So you may ask, Dan,
including by Twitter, by the way.
Yeah, exactly right. Donald Trump is far from the only person who was shut down by Twitter and social media. Comments on, say, climate change have been suppressed, and indeed COVID and the whole idea of whether we needed to be locked down and masked to the extent that we were. All of that was suppressed by social media sites like Twitter and Google. It's a very insidious process that has been taking place here in the last several years.
Well, and the other thing too, I mean, I just Tony Fauci and he served this number of presidents and public health and the AIDS epidemic and the COVID, and he saved all these lives. Okay, well that's one view. But, I mean, if you want to examine the substance of the record in terms of his management of AIDS, his management of COVID, there are certainly a lot of substantive criticisms that could be leveled against him. And, by the way, were by the gay community back during the AIDS epidemic. And obviously there are so many issues where he has said one thing and then said another and then tried to recast what he said at one point or another. Over the course of the last couple of years. I mean, the idea that just he was there for AIDS and he was there for COVID, and he made pronouncements and he made decisions, and they cannot be questioned. They cannot be scrutinized. I mean, that's not exactly a statement of accountability at the highest levels of government.
No, it's not. But, if nothing else, Dr. Fauci is a textbook example of a highly skilled, high-level bureaucrat. I mean, they are so good at soft-pillowing any criticism of them. There's always some contingent reason why they did what they did and why they are beyond criticism. The thing about COVID was that Dr. Fauci was front and center, standing there on the stage with President Trump throughout the first year and essentially driving this country's policy. We know what that policy was. It was for people to stay home, to mask up, and to lock down. The U.S. economy, Dan, was locked down for well over a year. And it was a big event. And in retrospect, you'd think we would want to revisit what Dr. Fauci and the Centers for Disease Control did. And possibly there were some things for which they should be given credit. But there's no way you could come through an experience like that and not have made mistakes. And clearly, one of the biggest mistakes, for example, is locking down school children for as long as they have been. That has done clear damage both to their educational attainment and to their psychology. We're going through an extraordinary flu season right now. Why? Because people were locked down and gained no immunity over the last 2 years. And now all those viruses are coming home to roost. Why is it not possible for the White House press spokesperson to understand that we need to have a conversation about those issues rather than accusing those who want to have that conversation of engaging in dangerous language?
You know, the Twitter files were now in installment 5 with Barry Weiss's yesterday. Barry Weiss as the vehicle for the distribution. And I know that the handle is, oh, there's nothing to see here, and from right and left, it's like, oh, we know all this. All this has already been argued and debated. Much of it dismissed or accepted, but I still think there is an immense importance to this because it's always nice to know what the truth is in comparison to what you suspected it was. So that's helpful. But also, too, even at Twitter, on the positive side, during the previous regimes at Twitter, you see debate among the Twitter minders about things like taking Trump off Twitter, like banning him from Twitter, including one apparently Chinese-American software engineer or censor who said, I'm a little hesitant on this. World leader, this doesn't meet our criteria. As somebody who came from China, I know what it's like to live in a repressive state. I don't want to be party to that. And that debate that happened internally. So, I mean, even things that are encouraging that there were sort of intellectual dissidents in those discussions about the decisions Twitter made on content moderation. I wonder what your perspective is on the importance of the release of these files.
Well, I agree that the comment by the Chinese American employee, but I mean, not wanting to go back to the Chinese system, that really jumped out at me as well. There is one aspect to this, Dan, that I think is really worth focusing on, and that was one of the things that caused Twitter back during the election to take down the New York Post stories on Hunter Biden for a period of time. And that was the statement put out by the former U.S. intelligence officials led by James Clapper and John Brennan and some 50 other former intelligence officials suggesting that this story about Hunter Biden, quote, has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. And we know as well that Twitter was in discussion back and forth with the FBI over what it should be doing with some of these postings. John, Dan, that is a very troubling development that social media companies are talking to national security agencies like the FBI on a regular basis to try to direct their coverage. We do understand that the Russians are out there running bots on social media, which is a problem on its own. But the idea that they should be getting guidance on what articles from legitimate U.S. news publication should be posted or not it was a very, very troubling development. And I do hope the House committee looking into this open up that question of what Clapper and Brennan were doing.
So when National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says, hey, these are private companies, they make private decisions, and of course there are going to be these conversations between law enforcement and intel agencies and so on and so forth, just in sort of good housekeeping type conversations about the potential for misinformation campaigns from foreign adversaries. But hey, these are private companies making independent decisions. You don't buy that.
I don't. I think it raises a serious question. First Amendment violations, free speech violations, do have to come at the hands of public authorities, city, state, federal government. We understand that. That's how the Supreme Court judges First Amendment cases. But something is going on here about the relationship between private companies like Twitter and Google and the pressure that they are getting from public agencies like the Justice Department or the FBI that I think, Dan, is pushing us into a kind of a gray area in terms of the First Amendment. I don't believe that those companies should be able to hide their free speech suppression completely behind the idea that they are a private company, not when they're allying to the extent they are with national security agencies.
You wrote a recent column that, in response to Merriam-Webster declaring the word gaslighting as the word of the year, that instead the word of the year should be identity. And you talked a little bit, sort of in parallel, the issue of identity that's at bar in this country to the issue of identity in play with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Explain what you were getting at.
Well, what I was getting at is that clearly what Vladimir Putin is attempting to do in Ukraine is to erase Ukrainian national identity completely. I mean, they have looted museums there of all of the artwork by Ukrainians. I believe the United Nations estimates it attacked at least 200 institutions of national heritage in Ukraine. And I do believe, Dan, this is one of the reasons the Europeans are supporting the Ukrainians as strongly as they are. They recognize that Russia is again trying to absorb another independent sovereign nation completely inside its own envelope, and that includes its national identity. That is a big subject these days. We argue about it in the United States. They argue about it in Europe. I think it relates a little bit to the conversation we were just having previously about whether the American left is trying to create a new American identity and push those of us who disagree with it out of the conversation. I'm not going to go so far as to equate that with what Putin is doing in Ukraine, but the subject of how a nation's identity is erased is something that's very much in front of us right now and for which the Ukrainians are carrying the battle.
He is Dan Henninger, deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. Do check out his column, Putin's Heist of Ukraine's National Identity, we were just discussing. Dan Henninger, thanks as always. Appreciate your time.
Great to talk to you, Dan.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
And now, a special announcement from the Mancini Law Group. Over the course of 4 decades, contaminated drinking